In 1944, in a cramped Decca studio in New York, a black woman in her 20s plugged a hollow-body Gibson into an amplifier, leaned into the microphone, and recorded a song that would outlive every man in that room. The engineers didn't know what they were hearing. The label didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't gospel, not really. It wasn't blues, it wasn't jazz. It was something the English language didn't yet have a word for. She bent the strings until they sounded like they were crying. She hit a distorted chord so hard it pushed the meters into the red. And then she smiled, the way gospel singers smile when they know the Lord is in the room. The song was called "Strange Things Happening Every Day." It hit number 2 on the Billboard race charts the following spring. And today, a growing number of music historians will tell you it is the first rock and roll record ever made. Her name was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and for 70 years rock and roll pretended she didn't exist. I'm Marlo, and if this is the kind of story you want more of, the women they tried to erase from rock history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it tells YouTube that stories like this one matter. Now let me tell you the rest. To understand how big Rosetta was, you have to understand who was watching her. Chuck Berry, the man who wrote the rule book for the electric guitar solo, once said, and I'm quoting him directly, "My whole career has been one long Sister Rosetta Tharpe impersonation." Little Richard called her his greatest influence. He said she was the one who pulled him up on a stage for the very first time at the Macon City Auditorium in 1947, when he was still a nervous teenage boy singing outside the venue because he couldn't afford a ticket. She heard him, she liked him, she put him on the stage with her, and after the show she paid him. That was the first money Little Richard ever earned as a performer. Johnny Cash, the man in black himself, said Sister Rosetta Tharpe was his favorite singer when he was a boy in Arkansas. He said it in his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction speech. Elvis Presley studied her picking. He sang her songs. He is said to have sat in the pews of black churches in Memphis as a teenager just to watch her play. Every single one of those men is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Every single one of them got there first. She was born Rosetta Newbin on March 20th, 1915, in a tiny town called Cotton Plant, Arkansas. Her mother was an evangelist, a mandolin player, a woman who preached in a denomination that allowed women to hold the microphone. By the time Rosetta was 4 years old, she was performing in church. By 6, she was traveling the evangelical circuit with her mother, billed as a singing and guitar-playing miracle. She was a prodigy in the literal sense of the word, and she did not play the way women were supposed to play. She didn't strum politely in the background behind a male preacher. She stepped out front. She bent notes. She attacked the strings. She treated the electric guitar like it was a second voice, arguing with the first one. Church ladies clutched their pearls. Preachers clutched their Bibles. And little Rosetta, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, kept pushing the amplifier a little louder every Sunday. There is a detail from those early years that I cannot stop thinking about. In the Pentecostal church where she grew up, the women shouted. They spoke in tongues. They fell on the floor when the Spirit hit them. And Rosetta watched all of that, and she translated it into sound. What you hear in her guitar, that growl, that wail, that cry, that is not a blues lick she learned from a record. That is the shout of a black Pentecostal woman who has seen the Holy Ghost, transferred through 6 strings and a tube amp. Rock and roll did not start in a recording studio. It started on a wooden church floor in Arkansas, inside the body of a little girl who was listening harder than anyone in the room. By the time she was in her 20s, she had signed with Decca Records in New York, and she was doing something nobody in gospel music had ever done. She was playing nightclubs, the Cotton Club, the Cafe Society. She was sharing stages with Cab Calloway and Duke Ellington. The black church pulled their hair out. Decent Christian women did not play the devil's music in smoky rooms full of drunks. But Rosetta didn't care. She believed the same God was in the nightclub as in the sanctuary, and she was going to bring him there whether anybody liked it or not. She was, by every measure, a star. And then came 1944. When she walked into that studio and recorded strange things happening every day, something alchemical happened. The gospel lyrics stayed, but the guitar did something new. She pushed the amplifier until the signal broke up. That grit, that fuzz, that aggressive, overdriven crunch that you hear in every rock record for the next 80 years, she put it there, on purpose, in 1944. A decade before Elvis Presley ever stood in front of a microphone at Sun Studio. 11 years before Chuck Berry recorded Maybelline. 12 years before Little Richard screamed the opening of Tutti Frutti. She did it first. She did it on a Gibson electric, in a floor-length gospel gown, with a smile on her face. And the record crossed over. It jumped out of the gospel ghetto and onto the mainstream charts. White teenagers started buying it. White musicians started studying it. The seed of rock and roll was in the ground, and the woman who planted it was about to be quietly, systematically written out of her own story. Here is where it gets almost unbelievable. On July 3, 1951, at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C., Sister Rosetta Tharpe filled a Major League Baseball stadium for her own wedding. 25,000 people bought tickets. 25,000. To watch her get married to a man named Russell Morrison, who would become her manager, and then, still in her $800 wedding dress, to watch her plug in and play a full concert. There were fireworks. There was a Cupid's heart pierced with arrows exploding in the DC sky above the pitcher's mound. A black woman playing electric guitar, filling a stadium in 1951. There was no playbook for this. There was no precedent. There wouldn't be another solo woman of any color filling a stadium for years and years to come. If that wedding concert had happened in 1971 instead of 1951, if a white man had been the one standing on that pitcher's mound with an electric guitar, we would have been taught about it in school. Every rock documentary would open with that footage. Instead, most of you are hearing about it for the first time right now. And then, slowly, the erasure began. As rock and roll exploded in the mid-50s, the men took the sound she had invented and ran with it, and the industry decided who got to be called the pioneer. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Elvis. All of them owed her a debt. Most of them admitted it. But the story that got told in books, in magazines, in the earliest rock documentaries, left her out entirely or dropped her in as a footnote. Gospel singer, they called her. Influential, they said, vaguely. The word they kept using was precursor, as if she were a rumor of rock and roll, a whisper before the real thing arrived, as if the men who inherited her sound had actually invented it. Listen to me carefully. The records were there. The dates were on the labels. Strange Things Happening Every Day was cut in 1944, and the entire vocabulary of rock guitar, the bends, the string snap attack, the holy shout over a backbeat, is audible on that recording. There is no ambiguity. There is only a story that was told about who mattered and who didn't, and she did not fit the story. She was black. She was a woman. She was openly having relationships with women in an era when that could get you killed. She was gospel when the industry wanted sin, and she was sin when the church wanted gospel. There was no shelf to put her on. So the shelf builders left her off the shelf entirely. They didn't play her records on rock radio. They didn't put her on the cover of Rolling Stone. By the early 70s, her bookings had dried up. Diabetes took one of her legs. She kept playing anyway, sitting down, the Gibson across her lap, until a stroke killed her in Philadelphia on October 9, 1973. She was 58 years old. She was buried in an unmarked grave. For decades, nobody even visited. The woman who invented rock and roll did not have a headstone. And then came the footage. The miraculous, undeniable footage. In 1964, a British television crew had filmed her performing at an abandoned railway station in Manchester, England, on a freezing afternoon, in front of a handful of European fans. She stood there in a long coat, plugged into a tiny amp, and she tore into a song called "Didn't It Rain?" She bent the strings, she laughed, she shredded. She turned a rainy English platform into a Pentecostal revival. That footage existed. It sat in a BBC archive for decades, and when the internet finally dragged it out into the light, the argument ended. You could not watch that video and pretend that this woman was a footnote. You could not watch her pick, her phrasing, her swagger, and pretend that Chuck Berry invented that. She invented it. He inherited it. And he had the grace, at least, to say so out loud. In December of 2017, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finally did what it should have done 40 years earlier. They elected Sister Rosetta Tharpe, not as a main inductee, as an early influence, a category they use for the pioneers who came too soon. On May 5, 2018, Brittany Howard of Alabama Shakes stood at the podium in Cleveland and inducted her. Brittany cried. She said, "It's long overdue." Long overdue by 45 years. 45 years between the day this woman died in Philadelphia with no headstone and the day a museum finally hung her name on a wall. 45 years of white men being called the architects of a house that a black woman had already built. So why am I telling you this story tonight? I'm telling you because the footage is still out there, and it is the single most important piece of evidence in the history of rock and roll. I'm telling you because every time you hear a distorted guitar, a bent string, a gospel growl, a holy scream over a backbeat, you are hearing her. Elvis is her echo. Chuck Berry is her echo. Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Jimi Hendrix, Keith Richards, Jimmy Page. Every last one of them is standing on the shoulders of a queer black woman from Cotton Plant, Arkansas, who wore a gospel gown and played a Gibson like she was arguing with God. Sister Rosetta Tharpe did not need the Hall of Fame to validate her. The Hall of Fame needed her to validate itself. And the fact that it took 45 years after she was in the ground to figure that out tells you everything you need to know about whose stories get remembered, whose get buried under somebody else's version of events, and how much work we still have to do to dig the rest of them back up into the sunlight where they belong. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you want to go find that 1964 Manchester footage right now and watch it for yourself, do me one favor. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next woman we bring back from the margins. And then click on the video on your screen right now. There is another one waiting for you. and she deserves your ears too.